Okay, right, well, good afternoon, everybody, or good morning if you're joining us from the other side of the Atlantic. Thank you for joining us on what is our inaugural Biobanking Webinar, run from ProLab Diagnostics here in the UK. I'm sorry to our friends overseas for the mix-up on the timing originally. We got a bit confused about British summertime, although I'm not quite sure why we call it that, because it rains here all the time in the summer, but there you go. Okay, my name is Mark Reed. I'm the General Manager of ProLab Diagnostics Europe. By way of group introduction, we as a company are part of an international group with its head office in Toronto, Canada, and also facilities in the States, originally established in 1974, although I think most of the people might have some sort of knowledge or history of us. Primarily, we are a manufacturer distributor of our own innovative diagnostic kits and reagents for microbiology, virology, and women's health. I'm sure some people recognise this thing, which will work out, that thing behind me, which is the Microbank product used for bacterial storage worldwide. In addition to that, we also have some carefully selected supply companies that we distribute for on an exclusive basis, and one of those is ILSA in France. We have guests online here from ILSA as well. I know Eric Salm, the General Manager of ILSA, is there somewhere. And we represent the NEO biobanking system exclusively in Canada and in the UK. Excuse me. I'm not going to say anything more about that because these two ladies to my right and left here will be handling presentations and questions for that. And to my left is the application specialist for the NEO and has been responsible for putting this together with two people in the far corner that you can't see because they're a little shy. Kerry and Gus have been running all the IT and the invitations, etc. And Charlotte to my right is the technical manager for ProLab Diagnostics, who guides the field application specialists both here and in Canada. We have people online from our head office in Canada. We have our President and CEO, Sir Robert Ray, is in a room somewhere there. And also Karen, who our Canadian guests will probably have had some contact with, arranging them to attend this today. And Feedback, who looks after sales and marketing from the office, is online somewhere as well. That is really kind of all that I wanted to say. We have three very important guests here who have very kindly agreed to speak for us. So what I was going to do, if Kerry could unmute the guests, and perhaps we could start with Louise. I'd like to just say hi, Louise, to everybody.
Of course. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much for inviting us to speak at your webinar this afternoon. So my name is Louise Sanders. I'm a development project manager at UCAS, the United Kingdom Accreditation Service, and I'll be giving you a webinar, just a presentation, just to chat you through the activities that we're currently doing in developing accreditation for biobanks. Thank you.
Thank you, Louise. Rachel.
Hi everyone, thank you very much to ProLab for asking us to attend. My name is Rachel Boyer-Blanchard. I'm one of the assessment managers at UCAS, and Louise and I have been working together over the last 2 years to bring about the new accreditation programme for ISO 2387-2018. So I'll be joining Louise in delivering a presentation to talk about the work that we've been doing over the last 2 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. And Sarah.
Hi everyone, and yeah, thanks to Anne and the ProLab team for inviting me to speak today. I am the Biobank Manager at the MRC University of Glasgow Centre for Virus Research, which is a bit of a mouthful to say the least. We're generally known as the CVR, and I've been working there for about 10 years in a couple of different biobanks, and I'm just going to tell you a little bit about what we do in biobanking at the CVR.
Excellent. Okay, so I think without further ado then, I'll be quiet and I will hand over to Anne. No, Louise and Rachel. See, I do know what I'm doing. So Louise and Rachel, I think you're gonna screen share and run us through your presentation first.
Of course.
Nobody wants to post any questions.
So hopefully you can all see my screen. Is that okay? Can you see it, Rachel?
Yep, I see it, yeah.
Let's press this button down here as well. So, as we said, thank you very much for inviting us to speak at your webinar this afternoon. We're going to just go through just a few slides just to give you an overview of the accreditation project that we're performing at the minute, which is around developing accreditation for biobanks, and that is to the international standard ISO 20387, which was published back in 2018. So we've already been introduced, so I won't go over that again. So we'll move straight into the presentation. So just to tell you a little bit about UCAS and who we are, our role, and the kind of activities that we get involved in. I've just got a couple of slides to start off and to tell you all about that as well. So UCAS is the national accreditation body for the United Kingdom. There are a number of accreditation bodies around the world, and generally we follow the same principles in that there is one accreditation body per country, and that's absolutely the case throughout Europe, and actually it is the case around most of the globe as well. So for the UK, it's us. So we're appointed by government, but we're not part of government at all. We are very important that in our role is that we remain independent and separate from government, but we have a close relationship with a memorandum of understanding with BEIS. So that's one of the departments in government, the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. And we deliver accreditation. So that's where accreditation is recognition of competence for organisations performing a variety of different sorts of evaluation or attestations, and that can be either calibration and testing, for example, and that's by far the largest area of organisations by number that we accredit. Then we also accredit inspection bodies who deliver inspections. So that could be in the same way that your MOT, your car is tested on an annual basis, it's inspected, and we accredit a number of organisations to perform that sort of activity. And then lastly on this list, we also accredit a rather large group of organisations who are certification bodies. So they would certify either quality management systems or products and services or personnel, for example, to deliver a particular process or an activity. So different things, and we get around, so we're in all sorts of different sectors, right across industry, working with government, working with a number of different organisations, charity sectors, national health services, and all sorts of different areas. So in doing our accreditation assessments, we look to assess the independence, the impartiality, and most importantly, competency and compliance against international and some national standards. And we've been around for quite a while now. So we were renamed as UCAS back in 1995. And until then, we went through a variety of different names, and we were first created by three gentlemen, literally in a porter cabin in the corner of a car park back in the 60s. And then we've grown rather significantly since then to become UCAS and the body and the accreditation body that we are. So we've been around for a very long time as an accreditation body, and we're pleased to be able to have an awful lot of experience in an awful lot of avenues and sectors. And as I've said, we operate under a memorandum of understanding with BEIS, and that ensures that we work closely with government as the appointed accreditation body for the United Kingdom. Just to give you an idea of how big we are, the kind of work that we do and the things that we get up to. So we're a not-for-profit, non-profit distributing company. We have somewhere around 265 full-time members of staff, and I say somewhere around because it grows quite quickly. And since writing this presentation, I imagine, and I would fully imagine and accept that that actually it's probably more like 270, 275 by now. So we have a large number of staff. Normally we have our office in Staines upon Thames, so just outside London, next to Heathrow. At the minute, of course, that's closed and we're all working from home, as we have done since, well, pretty much a year now, isn't it? So we've been working remotely and performing all of our assessments remotely, all bar a few. Some of them we have actually gone out and been able to go on site, and that's where it's been a critical assessment that we've needed to actually see on site. We accredit somewhere around 3,000, it's actually more like 3,300 organisations at the minute. Primarily, of course, they're in the UK, but we are operational around the world and accredit a number of organisations in China, South America, Africa, an awful lot in the Middle East. So we do get about a bit, and we get to see the world and lots of different airports and things as well. And then to assist those 265, 267-ish full-time members of staff, we have a pool of well over 700 external assessors and experts who we contract in to assist us on our assessments, to provide that technical expertise, to ensure that all of our assessments are current, are valid, and are robust and are thorough and searching, to ensure that we get the intended result and that the accreditation that we deliver is actually meaningful and can be relied upon. Last year, we delivered well over 31,000 assessment days between us. So as you can imagine, we all like to keep busy. And as part of our international role, we remain members of the European accreditation body. So that's the EA. We're members as well of ILAC and IAF, and contribute to all of those different organisations in terms of working together, in terms of committees, in terms of helping assess each other and looking to make sure that accreditation is consistently applied throughout the world. So just to give you an idea of how it all stacks together, we use this slide quite widely just to deliver, so you can see that picture. So as you can see, there's UCAS at the top of this pyramid. And as I've said, we have a memorandum of understanding with government, and we're also subject to assessments ourselves. So every few years, and in fact we have one in a couple of weeks' time, we are evaluated by our peers, so teams from other accreditation bodies, and they come and assess us in the same way that we assess our organisations to make sure that we all meet the standards. So we have a standard ourselves that we have to comply with, 17011, and we also assist our peers in assessing other organisations, other accreditation bodies around the world. So that's the layer that sits at the top of the accreditation triangle here. And we work with those national and some national standards, as well as the more prominent international standards, to deliver what we call conformity assessment. And as I've already said, that can be for testing or calibration laboratories, certification or inspection bodies, and any sort of independent evaluation process itself. And all of that is using standards or regulatory requirements or scheme criteria. So you might be used to certification schemes or inspection schemes, and we would use assess against those to make sure that they meet the requirements of those international or national standards. And all of that is to help support service providers and the products that they are making and putting out on the market. And all of that then helps people like government or consumers, purchasers, patients, anybody involved in the end delivery of those processes, and should help to deliver confidence, trust and assurance in the product that they're buying being what they think it is, the petrol that they put in their car being of the right composition, the medical treatment they get being of the correct level and the correct dosages and all that kind of thing. So that's the whole process, just to give you a feel of where we sit and how we work closely with government in support of their policies and their processes, and to give confidence and trust to consumers and anybody who's buying or using a service. Okay, so that's UCAS. Rachel.
Okay, so in the next couple of slides, I'm going to talk to you about ISO 23387. I will apologise if I'm sounding a bit like a robot at the moment, but I'm struggling with a rather poorly throat at the moment, so do bear with me. So as part of the project work that Louise and I have done, we started working around 2019 to look at how we were going to implement what was then a newly identified standard. So ISO 23387 was developed by the international community on the back of ISO 15189, which some of you may be familiar with, and the reference material standard. So neither of those were found to fit the biobanking community particularly well, and that led to this development of ISO 23387. So back in 2019, UCAS as an organisation asked for an expression of interest from the community as part of our development of our project and the proposal that we have. So we were looking to see what level of interest there was in taking forward the accreditation programme to ISO 23387. And we got a really good response, very positive, certainly within the UK. So ISO 23387 focuses specifically on the general requirements for biobanking. And within that standard, as with any international standard, there are core definitions. And the definition for biobanking is that it is defined as the process of acquisitioning and storing, together with some or all of the activities related to collection, preparation, preservation, testing, analysing and distributing that defined biological material, as well as any related information and data. So in terms of standards, it is classed as a generic standard that accreditation bodies across the world can use to assess the competence of biobanks. And it specifies generic requirements for biobanks. So that's things like impartiality, confidentiality, management, resources, and the processes. And alongside that, it looks at the collection, distribution, storage, maintenance, transport, and traceability of biological material. So the standard itself is designed to help the organisation implement systems to demonstrate their competence, and it focuses on the critical aspects of delivering a biobanking service, or what has been determined as the critical aspects of delivering a biobanking service. On to the next slide, please, Louise. So within those requirements, as Louise has already mentioned, as an accrediting body, we have to be impartial. But within the international standard, there are key requirements for competency, impartiality, and consistent operation of biobanks. And impartiality is one of the key areas. So that is that recognition that there could be activities that an organisation undertakes, relationships that an organisation has, that could impact on its delivery of that service. And we are currently undertaking pre-assessments where we're starting to look at how biobanks are starting to address some of these key requirements and ensuring that they've got records and evidence available to demonstrate how they address key requirements such as impartiality. Competency we look for in terms of organisational competence as well as individual competence of your personnel. So overall, is that organisation, is that biobank able to demonstrate that they're competent as an organisation? And we can determine that through the assessment of these individual elements of the requirements. So by looking at the competence of personnel, what their training consists of, how it's documented, does it reflect their tasks, tasks and responsibilities within the biobank? And how does the organisation monitor that competence? We look to see that they've determined what equipment and calibration is critical to delivery of the service that they provide to their users. So looking at what agreements they've entered into with researchers for what material they would provide, and therefore what equipment and calibration is critical to ensuring that they can deliver that agreement. It also includes key requirements in relation to collection, transport, reception and the distribution of that biological material. And a key part here is maintaining the traceability of that material right from collection through distribution to disposal, and making sure that there's evidence at all of the key points, the critical points in those steps to maintain the traceability of that biological material and any associated data and information. As with a number of the international standards, there are requirements for quality control and for validation and verification of the methods that are utilised. And again, we've had some really interesting discussions through our steering group and now moving onwards into our project about these key requirements of quality control, of validation and verification. What does that look like? How can organisations demonstrate that in a biobank? What are the differences in a biobank to a laboratory? And how can they capture that and provide that assurance to a researcher of the material that they're distributing? So again, that's included within the requirements of ISO 23387. It's something that, you know, we're enjoying the discussions and the lively debate that we're having about the implementation of those requirements. Critical to service provision will be the provision of data and information, and therefore it goes that the security and the management of that data and information plays a key part in the implementation of the requirements of ISO 23387. So again, we look at what systems are in place. Are they off-the-shelf software packages, or are they bespoke in-house built systems? And have they been validated? How confident can the organisation be in the integrity of the data, the sustainability of that data, and making sure that it's maintained in a secure and a sustainable way? As with the other international standards that I've referred to, the quality management system wraps around the requirements of ISO 23387, and in doing that it includes requirements for how an organisation manages any non-conforming work and any complaints, and their internal audits and things like document control. So again, looking at key policies, procedures that are in place. Has the organisation defined how it will manage non-conforming work, what that looks like? How do they manage the complaints, and how does that all feed into the overarching governance body for the biobank? So overall, the ISO 23387 includes many of the requirements that are included within other international standards, but as we've discussed on a number of occasions, the devil really is in the detail within the requirements, and looking at the depth under each of the clauses to ensure that an organisation is able to demonstrate conformity with these requirements. Back over to you, Louise.
Thank you. So as we've said, this is a brand new area of accreditation for UCAS, so it's subject to a development project. So we're working closely with the organisations who've shown an interest in the pilot project itself. And as Rachel mentioned, we have developed and created an advisory steering group, and I think we're lucky enough to have several members from that group on the call today. So good afternoon to you. And they are helping us to understand the standard in terms of interpreting it for application for biobanks. So we understand accreditation and laboratories very well, but in terms of how the requirements translate into what it will really look like in a biobank, we've had to ask for some help for that. And we've been very lucky to have a lively and good group, very varied group. So biobanks that don't just cover human tissue, but crops and veterinary and fungi and all sorts of different biobanks. So we have a group of experts who are helping us to develop our accreditation. As well as our understanding of the general processes, we also need to train our staff as well. So Rachel, as an assessment manager, is the person who will be going out and doing those assessments. So we've had to help her to understand the requirements, and we're developing that constantly as we go through the process. We have technical experts who will be assisting us in that assessment and the assessments that we do. So people who really understand biobanks, and we're hoping that that will work very closely and very well with the accreditation body working as the experts in accreditation, and the two groups going together and actually performing really good and rigorous and robust assessments. So we're thinking we're doing pretty well at the minute, as we've got a number of experts. We've got our advisory steering group, and we're learning well and quickly as we work our way through this project. And then the other side of accreditation is that once any assessment has been performed, it is always independently reviewed by someone who has not been involved in the assessment at all. And obviously those members of staff have to be trained as well. And we're doing that as well. And so I'm already doing that work. So it's all working pretty well so far. And then just a final slide to talk about what the objectives are. So this is what we keep having to remember. This is what we're wanting to achieve. So we're wanting to develop a credible assessment and a regime for the assessments itself. We had to ensure that it was feasible to accredit biobanks against the requirements of 2387. So we've done a lot of work in comparing the requirements against established standards such as 17025, 15189, and then the proficiency scheme standards as well, and reference material standards, as well as human tissue authority requirements as well, just to see how they align with each other and to make sure that the key requirements of other standards are present in 2387. And we're more than happy that does exist, and that we will be able to use 2387 as a standard to deliver accreditation against. So we're going to need to assess the competency of biobanks. So we need to ensure there's an acceptable approach to those assessments, and that's going well at the moment as well. So that's the assessment, and that's how we're developing our accreditation. So the next slide is really to give you an opportunity to ask us any questions. I understand that if you'd like to ask any questions, you're to use the chat function. So please do so if you have any questions, and we'll be more than happy to answer them for you if we can. Okay, thank you, and that's our presentation.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Louise. Rachel, fascinating, very, very informative. As the lady said, guys, there is a chat function, so you can drop your questions into there. What we're also going to be doing at the end of today's webinar is you will see an invitation to a Teams meeting will pop up in the chat. That is for anybody that wants to join that and have a chat afterwards. Not everybody will be able to stay, but it's an extra option. The ladies are going to stay for a little while, and of course we will be here if anybody's got any specific questions at that point. A couple of hands did pop up while we were doing it. I'm not quite sure why, maybe that was a mistake, but if you do have something, just pop it into the chat and we will certainly respond. Okay, so again, I will now pass over to Sarah.
Hi, can you all hear me okay? Yeah. Brilliant, I'll just share my screen. There we go. Sorry about that. As I said at the beginning, I'm the Biobank Manager at the Centre for Virus Research up in Glasgow. I'm just going to talk a little bit about the biobanking that I've been involved in, that we do at the CVR. Before I do that, I will start off with, sorry, I'll fight with my computer, with a little bit of an introduction to the CVR itself. And CVR was established in 2010. And it represents the UK's largest grouping of human and veterinary virologists. Although the centre itself is relatively new, there's actually a really long history of virology research in Glasgow, and that goes back to at least the 1950s, when the first MRC Centre for Virology Research was established. That was under the directorship of Sir Michael Stoker, who was the first chair of virology in any British university, but he's also the namesake of the building that we now work in, this lovely gold building that you see on us on the university's Garscube estate. Centre's mission is to carry out fundamental research on viruses and viral diseases and translate the knowledge gained from these for the improvement of health and benefit of society. In the CVR, there are two main biobanks or sample collection resource studies, however you want to describe them, and that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. So the first of these is the HCV Research UK, and I joined the CVR back in 2011 to establish the Biobank for HCV Research UK, which is a consortium that was created to underpin research into hepatitis C and provide resources for the research community. The consortium is made up of clinicians, basic scientists, public health and patient groups. And when we set the consortium up, the aims were to establish a national cohort of patients, develop a centralised biorepository and clinical database, make these data and samples available to the research community, and also to create a sustainable model beyond the initial funding period. And when we closed recruitment in 2016, we had considerably over 10,000 patients in the cohort. I believe it's actually closer to 12,000. And more than 150,000 samples had been collected. And to date, we've had around about 90 or so applications from various people in academia, industry, and public health bodies. So the structure of HCV Research UK is that it's led jointly by chief investigators at the universities of Glasgow and Nottingham, with recruiting sites across Scotland, England and Wales. Unfortunately, we never quite made it out to Northern Ireland, which is a bit of a shame. As well as the blood samples, we also collected a rich clinical data set from patients, and that can either be used to identify the most appropriate samples, as metadata to accompany the samples, or as a research resource in its own right as well. And access to the samples and clinical data is through the Tissue and Data Access Committee, or TDAC. We do like an acronym in academia. So in 10 years or so that HCV Research UK has been active, we've had impact in quite a number of areas. One of the most significant was probably when the NHS England Early Access Programme for direct-acting antivirals for hepatitis C began. I think that was about 2014 or so. The existing infrastructure meant that we were able to collect samples from these patients and also assist the NHS with data collection in order to assess the programme. And that led to, or indirectly led to, the introduction of new direct-acting antiviral treatments, which have been a major change in the treatment landscape in treating hepatitis C. The availability of our sample resource was also pivotal in developing the Stop HCV Consortium, which is another academic research consortium led by colleagues in Oxford, which was established to study stratified medicine for hepatitis C. We've also provided data to pharma companies to assist with various submissions, to NICE, the FDA, EMA, as well as studies on cost effectiveness, comorbidities, drug utilisation and various other things. And additionally, we've provided samples and data to quite a number of academic researchers, resulting in various publications, and some of that work is still ongoing now. However, as I mentioned, the treatment landscape has changed really dramatically since we began this project. There's now a cure rate of about 95%. and the treatments are much more tolerable to patients than the previous interferon-based treatment was. That has meant there's been a bit of a shift away from some of the really active research in HCV. So there's less demand for the samples and data, but we do remain open for business. If I was to be giving this talk at the end of 2019, it would pretty much just have stopped here. But of course, that's not what happened. We know that along came COVID, and the world changed really dramatically just over a year or so ago. Being a national centre of virology research, the CVR has played a crucial role into research into SARS-CoV-2, which is the virus that causes COVID-19. Even before the country went into lockdown last March, the CVR had swung into action. And once the country did go into lockdown and all academic research pretty much stopped, us and some of our collaborators and other virology institutes carried on working as best as we could throughout lockdown. As well as a lot of in-house research, there are at least 4 consortia that the CVR and the CVR staff and research groups are members of. There's the COVID-19 Genomics UK Consortium, COG UK, which you might have heard of in some of the recent news coverage, with discussion of genomic sequencing and variants. There's the UK Coronavirus Immunology Consortium, known as UKCIC. There is the G2P UK National Virology Consortium, and the one that I'm involved in, which is the ASARIC Coronavirus Clinical Characterization Consortium, another lovely mouthful, known as ASARIC 4C. So that's what I'm going to talk about for the next couple of slides. So ASARIC is the International Severe Acute Respiratory Infection Consortium Clinical Characterization Protocol. I wasn't joking when I said we liked a mouthful and a bit of an acronym. So commonly known as ASARIC 4C. And I manage the Scottish Outbreak Lab for the ASARIC 4C Consortium. The consortium is UK-wide, made up primarily of doctors and scientists committed to answering urgent questions about COVID-19, and the aim is to do this quickly, openly, and for the benefit of all. This map shows the layout of the key partners in the consortium. The recruiting centres are not shown in this case because there are over 300 of them throughout the UK. They're collecting data and or samples from patients who've been hospitalised with COVID. This happens in a tiered manner, so either data collection only, single sample collection, or a longitudinal set of samples. And this is dependent on the local resources, really. The consortium is managed by chief investigators from Edinburgh, Liverpool and Imperial. And samples are received in the 2 outbreak labs in Glasgow and in Liverpool. The ASARIC Consortium have been preparing for such a major outbreak for several years. So when the first cases were reported in the UK, we were able to deploy the protocol almost immediately and start collecting data and samples. So to focus on the Scottish Outbreak Lab, due to the existing infrastructure and experience that we had from developing HCV Research UK, meant the CVR was well placed to host the Outbreak Lab for ASARIC 4C. So we receive samples from all the Scottish recruiting sites, so they're hospitals over the majority of mainland Scotland. We receive them already processed by the hospital lab staff. They're shipped to us in batches. We check, we check, we document, we store these, and then they are released on to partner researchers who generate the research data. The intention is not to end the outbreak sitting on a biobank, but to use every drop of every sample to have the biggest possible impact on the crisis at the time when that impact is needed. Any investigator with the ability to contribute can access data and samples via an application. Again, we've got another lovely acronym, the Independent Data and Materials Access Committee, or known as IDAMAC. And finally, although we've only been going a year or so, considerable impact has been generated by ASARIC 4C. This slide's from the ASARIC website, shows some of the publications which have been produced in the last year. There's been quite a few more than are listed here, including a recent study which identified clusters of markers of inflammatory disease. Had a bit of news coverage recently, as that may give some insight into why some patients suffer more severe disease, as well as giving some ideas into potential therapeutic targets. And that one, I always kind of feel that we've achieved something, because that was one of the first studies that we supplied samples to. So quite a lot of material from our biobank went into that particular study. And that's me pretty much finished. Can't end without doing an acknowledgement slide, and this shows hopefully just the sheer number of people that have been involved in this study. I mean, HCV research UK was pretty big. ISARIC 4C is enormous. I mean, Liverpool Outbreak Lab team is listed as one entry, but it's a huge team. It's a much bigger team than we have in Glasgow. All the investigators, all the study teams, all the project managers, obviously the funders, but the people that I really want to thank are the clinicians and research nurses who are actually in the hospitals doing the recruiting, and the most important people are the patients and their families who have donated their time, their data and their samples. So I shall end there.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. It's quite an impressive organisation up there. Okay, I think what we will do, we'll just press on again, guys, if that's okay. So the ladies aren't going to be around later on. There's nothing appearing in the chat just yet, so don't be shy. Somebody must have some questions. And I think it's time for Anne.
Hello, I hope you can all hear me okay. I'm just going to start sharing my screen. So, as Mark said, I'm the field application specialist that has been looking after the NEO biobanking system for ProLab Diagnostics, and we are a manufacturer and distributor of products. But when it comes to the NEO sample management, we work with a lovely company called ILSA Diagnostics that are based in France. They were established in 1975, and they've got two sites. One is in Besançon, and I'm sure I'll be told later whether I've said that correctly or not. The other site, I'm not going to attempt to pronounce in my Lancashire accent, so I'm just going to say that's on the outskirts of Paris. We exclusively distribute the NEO in both the UK and Canada, and currently we have 11 NEOs in the UK. This is where they are all located currently, and as you can probably see, they are predominantly in clinical laboratories, NHS laboratories. Since working with the NEO, I've been involved in a couple of seminars and webinars that I've joined, and I joined ISBA, I've joined the European Biobanking Week, and I joined the Biobanking Conference in Qatar last week. And from joining those, I've met quite a few lovely contacts, and I've also come across these two organisations, which beforehand, I have to hold my hand up, I didn't really know much about. What I have learned though is we are all very much driven by accreditation. So ProLab Diagnostics has to be accredited to ISO 13485. Clinical laboratories, many of which are online today, accredited to 15189. And like the ladies have lovely covered from UCAS, the lovely ladies from UCAS have covered this new, I'm going to call it new because it's new to me, this ISO standard 20387. What's become apparent from all of them is that they all focus on traceability. So that is where we move on to the NEO. So I just want to introduce you to the NEO really. I'm aware that some of you maybe before today hadn't heard of ProLab Diagnostics, or you may not have heard of the NEO. Some of you know us very well. So I just want this to be a bit of an overview about the NEO. So the NEO can guarantee the traceability of your samples. It ensures your sample integrity. It improves your tracking efficiency, and it can optimize your freezer space. So what do I actually mean by that? So the minute your primary tube is placed onto the NEO, that sample is allocated to the barcode on the plate, which is then allocated to a 2D barcode underneath the plate. I'll talk about the plates in a little bit more detail in a couple of slides' time. But once those plates are filled, you can either close one well or all wells in one go using an automated closer. These plates are then allocated into the freezer in a predefined area. All of this is then tracked through the NEO software from start to finish. So if you do happen to want to go back to a sample, you can search in the NEO software. You can release that one sample. You don't need to defrost the whole tray. You remove your sample that has its own unique 2D barcode underneath. This is then read in the 2D barcode reader, and the identifiable barcode will then be printed for you to then put onto your sample. All of this is tracked, like I said, throughout the NEO software, and you get a very clear screen of all real time what is actually happening, and you get a very nice smiley face, which I think we can all agree we probably need more of at the minute. So these are the NEO plates. They come in 4 formats. So you have a 96 well plate, a 48 well plate, and they both either come in a 500 microlitre or a 1 mil volume. They're all RNAs and DNAs free, so this doesn't affect any further testing. These plates can be stored down to -80 degrees as well, so there's no issue with your freezers. So some of the key features of the NEO comes as a complete package, so we provide everything that you need from the start of your process to the end, and everything you need in the middle. The NEO sample management software comes with it, which is an integral part of the whole process. You get 14 racks, which will hold 14 primary tubes, and these racks can handle any tube size between 7 to 17 millimetres. One of the key questions that people often ask us is how many samples it can process, and it can process up to 180 samples an hour. Like I've mentioned, you've got 4 different plate types. This really depends on your workflow, and usually once we have some discussions, we can kind of help you with this. It's also got the ability to aliquot into send away tubes. So if you wanted to aliquot into a separate tube and then into the NEO, there is the ability to do that as well. It all comes with disposable tips. It's got a tube detection control. So what I mean by that is if you place blood tubes onto position 1 and onto position 6, the NEO will know that, and it won't bother scanning all the other rows and waste your time. It's got customizable profiles, so we can set that for you. So we can set a routine sample, for instance, with 1 mil that can be stored for 300 days, or we can set any research samples for 500 microlitres for 60 days or whatever, and that's all customizable for you. We've got an intelligent fluid distribution, which means if the NEO tries to process your sample and it doesn't quite reach that threshold of what you've set of 1 mil, we can set like a lower level that is acceptable for you for any further testing. It'll do a double level detection, so it will look for any clots. It'll go in once to check if it's a bubble or it's actually a true clot. In that instance, it'll go back in again. If it is a bubble, it'll have usually removed it. It's got a security curtain, so once all your samples that have been scanned and your plates have been scanned, if you break that chain for longer than a couple of seconds, it will abort the process and make you rescan because it isn't sure whether you've done any switching of samples. It can all be connected to your LIS system, so full traceability from patient identifiers. So like I said, the software is really configurable to what you need and what your workflow. We can set multiple profiles. We set your sample volume, what is acceptable for any further testing. We can customize your user access so everyone has different levels or their own login. Like I said, we configure it to your tube type, depending on what tube you have. We'll give full user training and full super user training. And again, your freezers, we work this all out for you as well, so you don't need to go and buy any fancy new freezers or whatever. We can see what will fit into your freezers. So I'm conscious that was a really quick overview, but just to summarise a few points. The full cycle of the sample is recorded from the minute that the NEO meets that sample and scans that first barcode to the full cycle when you want it to be removed from your freezer 2, 3, 5, 10 years later, whatever that might be. It'll ensure your sample integrity, so you'll know how many times that sample has been in and outside of the freezer, so you'll know whether it's actually really is any good for any further testing. It'll improve your tracking efficiency, so you will be able to find your sample at any point throughout the whole process. It reduces any handling errors, so there's no user error or transcription error when writing out barcodes. It'll optimize your freezer space because it will put 96 blood tubes into quite a small footprint sample plate. Like I said, it'll process 180 samples an hour and handle any tube type within 7 to 17 millimeters. And again, the full expiry of the samples is recorded, so you cannot throw any sample out too early. And I suppose the work that's been going on in the UK and Canada and everywhere has been highlighted recently. We've hit some mainstream news places. So I think that just makes all biobanks are at the forefront at the minute, and I suppose all UK labs and anyone processing COVID samples. So well done, everybody online as well. Thank you very much for listening.
Okay, thanks very much, Anne. Right, there is some time for some questions if anybody wants to put anything into the chat now before we start the Teams. The Teams invite will come out through the chat momentarily. Obviously, grateful thanks to all of today's speakers and for everybody attending. One thing that I do want to add, and I'll probably get myself into trouble for this, is that in both facilities of ProLab Diagnostics in Richmond Hill, just outside Toronto, and also here on the Wirral in the UK, we do have demonstration suites where there are NEOs operational. So that means that we can organise one-to-one demonstrations via video link onto those things, and Anne can talk you through. And obviously, pandemic allowing, which is a little difficult at the moment, we do welcome people into our own virtual labs to come down and see them operational as well. From a UK point of view, of course, as I mentioned, there are already 11 sites now fully running in the UK, and all of them are quite open to receive visitors if you want to see one which is a little closer to where you are, and they are pretty well scattered out, I think, across the UK. I don't have a great deal more to add, I don't think, other than thanks again.
I have a question.
Charlie has a question.
Some questions I'd just like to ask, if that's okay. I'm curious to the UCAS ladies. How does our experience with this new ISO accreditation match with other countries, maybe in Europe? Are we ahead of the curve? Are we on par with them? Where are they all at with the same level of accreditation for biobanks in different countries?
Yeah, I can take that one. We are working with our colleagues across Europe and across the world, actually. We've all been attending lots of different webinars. We've actually been delivering training to some of our fellow accreditation bodies as well, so giving them awareness on the work that we've already been doing and discussing the requirements of 2387. So we're all fairly at the same point, I would say, across Europe as well. Some people are a little bit further ahead, but we certainly all at the same sort of level in terms of accreditation and developing accreditation at this point. Some people not across Europe but in other parts of the world have already accredited some of their biobanks, but as far as we know, it's still in its development stage across Europe.
Can I ask Louise on the back of that if anybody's been accredited in Canada yet for this?
Not that we're aware of, but that's not to say that they're not there.
Okay.
I do also just have a question for Sarah as well. Would you consider COVID to be a blessing or a curse for the world of biobanking? That's a great question.
Oh, that's $1 million question, isn't it? I mean, personally, I have to say both. My contract was actually due to end at the end of 2019, and then I got a short-term extension, which just turned into a rather longer extension because COVID happened. So, I mean, I can't exactly say it's been a complete curse because it's kept me in a job, but it has been quite a considerable change in the way that we worked. I mean, for us personally, I was used to working with bloodborne viruses, and then we moved into working with this new respiratory virus that we didn't really know much about. So had to increase our containment levels, and I had to, well, we didn't increase the containment levels. We already had have a CL3 suite in the CBR, but I hadn't personally worked in it, so I had to go and learn all new processes and adapt and do everything so much faster than we had done before, because it was happening right now. So yes, it's kept us busy, and I think in the current circumstances that is a real blessing. But yeah, we've been a wee bit hectic, to say the least.
I think all of us in this industry have been a bit hectic, to say the least.
Just a wee bit, yeah.
It's been a very interesting year. I'm sure most people online today are obviously involved in this. Have probably never seen anything quite like it in terms of the pressures of work and the hours, etc. But that's the industry we chose to work in. I know certainly here in the UK, the recognition of the NHS was very high profile. I tended to focus quite a lot. I'm not going to be anti-political, by the way. Did focus an awful lot on the frontline workers and people on a Thursday night standing outside banging pans to them and clapping for the nurses. Usually just as we were getting home, having been out from 6 o'clock in the morning. To start with, I thought they were clapping for us as we were getting back home. I think we are the in-health service, but certainly my congratulations to everybody that's on here that's involved for the job that everybody is doing. I did want to mention just one last thing as well for those that are watching. This is not the office in the UK that we're sat in case you think we live in some sort of grand palace over here. We came here obviously for social distancing because there are screens that you can't see which are separating us. This is just a nice local hotel. Certainly my friends in Canada that are online will remember sitting in here when they were allowed to a year ago having dinner. It's a dining room that we converted, but it served the purpose. Okay, so if there aren't any questions coming up, if you can't see, please do jump onto that Teams thing for a little bit of an informal chat. Certainly the guys from ProLab in Canada and the UK will be staying on if anybody wants to catch up, or the territory managers and things will be there if there's somebody you want to talk to. And on that note, I thank you all again. So stay safe and stay sane. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.